I never wanted to become an alcoholic. I never wanted to get married. I never wanted to have kids. And those single 3 things that I didn't want are the best things in my life today. So, that's a really good example of God's plan is way better than mine. And if I just kind of give him the opportunity and say, okay, I'm going to do your will today, really incredible things happen.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Finding New Waters. My name is B. Reeves. I'm the Director of Business Development here at New Waters Recovery in Raleigh, sitting here with our CEO, Justin McClendon, and our special guest in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Mr. Dan Gilmer. Welcome, Dan.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you all so much for having me. I'm a big fan of y'all's
Man.
podcast and y'all's platform.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. We're glad you're here. And Dan is one of those people. I met him at an event a few years ago in Pensacola. And the guy who hired me into this field had, I think, just hired him. And he said, you got to go meet this guy B. And he said the same thing to me. And he was one of those people. I met him and I was like, I like this guy. I like 100%. The cut of his jib. And we've gotten to spend a lot of time together lately over, at conferences and, golf related work trips and things of that nature. And Dan's just a good egg and works for a great company. Just tell us, what do you do, first of all, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So, I am the director of clinical outreach for TNR Recovery Group's Texas programs, which is Cypress Lake Recovery outside of Houston and Origins and Hannah's House down on South Padre Island. That actually entails more than just business development in our organization. So really for Texas, I head up our outreach team, our aftercare team, and continuing care, and building out those plans and managing those employees. And then also our alumni program. So it's kind of getting everybody in, getting the right people into our program, making sure they go to the right places after, and then keeping them all connected so that we can be there when our alumni needs us, or, just offer support to make sure that they don't ever really need us again.
I hear you. Sometimes that's a bigger job at New Waters, is getting somebody out to the right place than getting them in.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I wanted to just touch on with you, Dan, is, you're one of these freaks who got sober really young. Will you tell us a little bit about that and how you managed to do that? Yeah.
I'd love to. So, I started, if you get sober young, you started doing drugs young, that's kind of a prerequisite. Well, and so I was 13. Me and my buddy were looking for some money to buy some weed or something, which is, kind of normal, I guess, maybe at that age. Anyway, we find a prescription bottle. And so it was Oxycontin. It was about 60 Oxycontin. And I remember he didn't want his parents to find them in his room or something. So he gave them to me after we did some that day. And when I first used Oxycontin, it made me feel internally like who I'd been pretending to be on the outside for so long. Because a lot of us that are in recovery, before we find recovery, we're full of fear, we're full of insecurities, and those fears and insecurities and dishonesty traits run our lives. And we have this actor that we present to the world. And Oxycontin made me internally feel like that person I was pretending to be, and I could walk around with some confidence. And I made a decision that day when I was 13. I'll do anything I can to feel like this. This is my goal every day, to feel like this, and there's nothing that's going to stand in the way of that. And I'll give up whatever I have to feel like this. I remember having that thought. And so I did all the rest of the prescription in the next 2 days. And that's really a microcosm of what my addiction looked like for the next 7 years. So I ended up getting sober at 20. It was my 4th treatment experience. And it was the first time I followed a discharge plan, and I left the state for aftercare, and I did a long-term gender-specific program in Prescott, Arizona called Clean Adventures. And at the end of that, I stayed out in Prescott for another year after I completed treatment, and I've been sober since then, which was 2015.
Man, that's awesome.
And Dan, when did you, I'm curious, just hearing that timeline, when did you make the switch or the decision to start working in the field?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. You know, most of all my friends that we went to treatment with would stay in Prescott and get jobs in treatment and be techs at treatments. I was a tech. I was a really bad tech. I sponsored everybody. I wanted to save them all. And they were like, there's boundaries here that you can't cross. And I was like, well, if you're going to tell me how to save people's lives, I'm not going to work here anymore. And so I went and sold solar panels. But when I moved back to Baton Rouge, I don't know what happened. Something in me was like, I'd seen a lot of the treatment industry in Prescott in 2015, a lot of the good, a lot of the bad. And I wanted to work in treatment in terms of helping other people to recover. And I wanted to use my story as a platform to promote others, specifically young men in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or from like SEC schools that just took a left turn when they should have turned right, and really needed to like shift their life at that, really pivotal age for most kids. So I opened some sober living houses in Baton Rouge when I moved back, and they just got chock full of plant workers twice my age. And that was the demographic that really needed resources back then, and needed safe housing. And so, you know, that quickly dovetailed into doing admissions and then outreach at local treatment centers. But that wasn't the plan. The plan was to do sober livings and then like maybe go back to school, figure out the rest. But it turned into me doing admissions at 21, and then outreach by 22. And now I've been doing it for like 8 years.
Awesome. I two things. One, I certainly didn't have this wasn't part of my plan to work in this field. I didn't even know what I do was a job. The other thing is, you said your original idea for these sober livings in Baton Rouge was for wayward SEC guys who had taken a wrong turn somewhere and needed a little bit of guidance or something like that. Yeah, I definitely was one of those guys. I took a wrong turn in an SEC school, and then it took me another 20 plus years before I ever got sober. But I could have used you, but you were like, in diapers probably then.
Yeah, I was probably 7. It's too young.
Yeah. But first of all, getting sober young is one thing, but also getting sober young in Louisiana and Baton Rouge. I mean, what was that experience like?
So I came home on an amends trip for my brother's wedding. I was about 10 months sober, and weddings in the South have a lot of drinking, and it's pretty much like 7 days of different parties. I ended up making amends on that trip after accidentally like taking a sip of a vodka drink at a crawfish boil. And I remember I blamed my mom for it, because I was like, why are you going to put a drink right next to me? I shouldn't have blamed her. I go and I make these amends because it was scheduled. It was for a neighbor. Most of the amends I had to make were my parents' neighbors growing up. That's a whole another story. I'm really good at B&Es. And I go and I make these amends. Cool story. My neighbors, growing up there, their brother was like 30 years sober. So they understood the amends process and addiction. And it was pretty cool. And I'm walking home. I call my house manager. The original house manager I had in treatment, we were just friends in recovery at that point. And he said, it sounds like the 10-step promises have come true for you. You recoiled from alcohol as from a hot flame. You sought out how you could better help someone else, and you cleared the wreckage of your past. And guess what? I'm having a really bad day, and you calling me and us talking about recovery and me being allowed to help you and you being allowed to help me. And I didn't think about drinking at all. And I knew that something spiritual had happened in me because biologically I was pickled. I was crossed the point of no return. When I put alcohol or a mood altering substance into my body, I mean, my MO is you give me 10 hours, I'm getting Oxycontin. That was every single relapse. And so that didn't happen. And it was pretty incredible. I mean, the night before that, I was like, my first night back in Baton Rouge, I remember sitting on my parents' front steps. I still smoked back then. I was smoking a cigarette. I was like vibrating. I was praying to God. And I was like, God, like, I am terrified. I know exactly where to go to get high. I have phone numbers still memorized. And I don't know if I can go this week and safely return back to Arizona sober. And I remember saying, what do I do? And he said, go to sleep. Clear as day. Like the first time God ever spoke to me, he said, go to sleep. And I was like, that's cool. God spoke to me, but you got anything better? I was like, all right, give me something more. And I remember he said, you say all this. It was kind of like you preach all this, to your sponsees, back in Arizona, but you don't trust me. Like, why are you afraid? And so I say all that because, yeah, there was a ton of fear coming back to Louisiana because socially there's drinking everywhere. Drugs just kind of go along with that. The flip side to that is typically where there's really good partying, like New Orleans and Baton Rouge, there's really good recovery too. And so I could go into like another little segue about like my first meeting back in Baton Rouge. I got the meeting sheet and I texted everybody. I said, my name's Dan from Arizona. I'm back here. Text me if you ever need anything. And because I needed a group, I needed a community. Like I knew what I was getting back into. So I say all that to say, like, there's definitely triggers. There's definitely like social things in Louisiana that make it hard to stay sober, but you stay close to God and the 12 steps and like the program of recovery. It's really a beautiful place to be in recovery and be sober.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate you pointing that out about, and this is something I don't think it's ever come up on this podcast, but it's so true that places that are big party scenes where people kind of move there to party have great recovery. That's been my experience, whether that's New York, which is the biggest city in the country, the city that never sleeps. They have AA meetings that, 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
And then, cities like Asheville and Charleston, which are kind of party towns, and New Orleans is probably the biggest example. That's a great point, man. Yeah.
Yeah. Very true. So I had a thought there and it just escaped me.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say another thing too, you brought up, which I love is that subtle, but yet huge difference, subtle in the verbiage, but huge in the practice of believing in God versus relying on God and trusting God. It's easy for me to believe in God, especially that it works in other people's lives. And to quote George Costanza, for the bad stuff, but to trust God and to, just to take advice, whether it's from, a sponsor or the group or, peers, and just saying I need to trust the process here and trust God. Another thing you said that I love is, when I got sober, I heard a lot of people told me I can restart my day at any time. And I've read that in the literature. And it was one of those things I started to implement kind of right away. Like, I've been on the street in Chapel Hill. I've done it on a golf course. I've done it in parking lots. I've done it in stores where I've literally airports gotten on my knees and asked God to please let me restart my day. But the flip side of that is what you just talked about. Sometimes I need to just end the day and just go to bed. There are sometimes where I come home from where there's something going on at work or in a relationship or just with the general public. And so sometimes it's time for me just to shut it down and, instead of sitting around and, fretting and stewing and maybe even trying to get into action with some literature and all that, but just get on my knees. Thank God for keeping me sober that day. Please keep me sober tomorrow and go to bed and just end the day instead of starting it over,
I like that, and I think we could all attest to, sometimes things just look completely different with a good night's sleep under our belt, right?
Absolutely.
Fresh set of eyes, so to speak.
Yeah.
And we have that daily reprieve,
Yep.
all of us thought it was impossible to get the 6-month chip or the 3-month chip or the 1-year chip. We looked at those people doubting, and it's, you know, validity for ourselves and for our own story. And like to coin the phrase, one day at a time, a lot of time that's used probably the wrong way. But for me, like we did our 10-step inventory every night, and I did it every night on paper with notebooks for like the first 4 years of my recovery. I got to a point with like my prayer and my routine that I can just go through where I was resentful, dishonest, fearful, you know, in my head talking to God, and it kind of becomes like a conversation. But that's what keeps this all from snowballing, because I'm still the guy that's full of fear, insecure, if I allow that. If something happens today and I don't address it tonight with God and leave it in today, then tomorrow might not be a little harder, but if I do the same thing again tomorrow, it's like, then I start to put rocks back in the bag. I start to carry that bag of rocks again.
Yep.
I'm a big believer that when you work the 12 steps, you only have to do them once in life. But 10, 11, and 12, we have to consistently do daily.
I hear you. I heard somebody say something recently I'd never heard, which is we can start doing any step that starts with a 1 right away. So, step 1, obviously, and then 10 through 12. And I didn't hear that until pretty recently, but I did start prayer and meditation kind of right away. And back to your, the daily reprieve, I don't have control. I don't have control over my spiritual condition. Like I wish I could just, maybe I'll get there, say, you know what? I'm going to be happy, joyous, and free today. And no matter what's going on, I'm going to have a great attitude. I'm not there yet, man. Maybe I will get there someday. But what I do have control over is the maintenance. So I can do these certain things I do every day. And when I do that, I do have a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition, not if I'm like full of joy. Like I just, hopefully I'll get there, but so far not yet.
Yeah, I did want to go back and kind of probably answer a question differently. Y'all asked kind of what it was like to get sober young. I kind of gave you like some experiences in Louisiana that like someone who was 40 could have had with the amends process and going home. And so like to highlight like getting sober at 20 in Arizona, it was pretty easy because there was, 1,000 treatment beds in a town of 40,000, and everyone was sober at the coffee shop, the restaurants, like everyone was either in recovery or trying to get back into recovery, or should be. And so like that part was kind of easy. When I came back home, I had such a low. I mean, I was beat down. To be really transparent, I had brief success with the 12 steps. I'd have brief success with treatment. And the first time anyone ever told me, like, you have a mental obsession and a physical allergy and a spiritual malady, and you need God and the 12 steps to save your life, like, it resonated with me. I read Bill's story and I was like, this is me. This is why I've been crying myself to sleep, begging God that I'm not going to get high the next day. I already wake up with a game plan on how I'm going to get high. This explains everything. So I wanted to get sober the first time I was ever in treatment at 19. And the next really year was just like a vicious cycle of me trying to. And so when I finally got sober, I finally worked the 12 steps, I finally started sponsoring people and like gained this confidence. I came back to Louisiana and like I got lucky. There was a group of guys that was all kind of my age. We'd either been to treatment before or not. And then I opened my sober living, and I always had like this community around me. And then, probably a year into me having my houses, my best friend from Arizona got shipped out to me, 1 day sober. And I moved him in with me, and me and him kind of did this. He was a year younger than me, and me and him did this sobriety thing together. And it was trying to find and have like the most fun we possibly could in the world at the expense of our bank accounts, sleep, everything under the sun, to just live life to the fullest, because we discovered like there's a whole world out here outside of just getting high and like sitting in the dorm room or sitting on the couch or just letting, life pass you by. And we wanted to taste and see everything we possibly could. And so I think really Arizona, the treatment I was provided, the freedom my parents gave me to go out there and just reset my life for a year, really all made it really possible. And I never thought I was going to be sober for all of my 20s, but I had a lot more fun than probably some people that were in their, addiction or partying for those 10 years. I mean, I had a blast.
I hear you, man. And I mean, that's part of the reason I was so excited to have you on here is you're just such a great example of, I mean, yeah, I want to hear kind of what happened, what you're like, what it was like but like the fact that not only have you had this full life, you've had a great time doing it and that's why it's so important to hear these stories of people who, it's one thing to be like, oh yeah, I quit drinking and using drugs when I was 20 versus like, yeah, I got sober when I was 20 and my life, I had no idea how unbelievable life could be, and I try not to have regrets, I don't really, but because it all happens the way it's supposed to, but I mean, I went another 21 years before I was able to get where you got at such a young age. And that's awesome. And I just want people to know you're such a great example of that this can be done and it's not a punishment. This is, so many people see this as some kind of punishment, but it's not, it's a gift.
Yeah. I definitely was resentful for a little while. Like on my last inventory on the 4-step, I had not put 2 things on there. One was my son, who I had before I ever went to treatment the first time. And I put him on my inventory because I could always like think my way out of a resentment and not put it down on the inventory. But I had to put my son down because he did drastically change my life and my selfish tendencies. And I had to stop thinking selfishly only about myself. And that came with responsibility. I was resentful for that. And I had to put God down. I put God down because I didn't want to be an alcoholic or a drug addict. I didn't want to be born with predisposition or fear or insecurity that led me down this path. Now, 10 years later, with thousands of people that I've helped at least get into treatment or give them an opportunity to get sober, not even counting the sober living. It's like all of this was for me to be on this podcast today. And hopefully maybe someone will hear like, oh, there's an opportunity for me to get sober at a young age, and other people do it. And it's awesome.
Man, the fact that you just said out loud that you were willing to admit that you put your son on your 4-step as a resentment because that got in the way of that's like some powerful stuff right there, man. That's amazing.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, I think, that's huge. Like B just said, I think being able to just kind of admit that out loud and I think to admit that to yourself too, man. And the piece about God as well. I think that's another big one that a lot of people look over is, resentments are where they are, man. And it's important to be able to name those things and face them, but not to speak for you. The son piece, I can relate to that myself. I have 2 kids, 2 boys of my own. And, just because we felt that way doesn't mean that, we love them any less or that changes the dynamic. It's just being honest and naming something for what it is, right?
Yeah. I'm selfish. That's the root of most of my problems,
Right.
And that's why I do the prayer and meditation and the daily reprieve, because, it's funny you mentioned that, you mentioned your family. Like I've had 2 kids since then. My wife's 37 weeks pregnant now.
Nice. Congrats.
Thank you. Thank you. We're stoked. Everything, we're trying to get through it, and she's ready for this baby to come out, and so am I. I think he'll come out uh really well. Everything looks good, and so we're excited about that. But I never wanted to become an alcoholic. I never wanted to get married. I never wanted to have kids. And those single 3 things that I didn't want are the best things in my life today. So, like, that's a really good example of God's plan is way better than mine. And if I just kind of give him the opportunity and say, okay, I'm going to do your will today, you know, really incredible things happen.
That's awesome. And, the fearless and searching moral inventory, which I might need to revisit my 4-step but to see if there's something that I like subconscious, like there's no way that could actually be on there. But I mean, that's huge. I thank you again for sharing that. And back to that you're talking about doing a nightly inventory. And I've been using this app now for 6.5 years, something, since in early sobriety. I started using this app, and it only takes a little while to do this. So there's no excuse to not do it. And one of the questions that it asked me is, was I kind and loving toward all? I mean, it's out of the book. And then the other thing that deducts the most points from it is if I didn't reach out to somebody in recovery that day. But the question about being kind and loving towards all over time, and it didn't take too long. I'm not saying that I stopped doing this, but I started feeling it coming on faster. So before I got sober, and even in early sobriety, I could be on a phone call or in a meeting or in traffic or at a restaurant or something and kind of pop off a little bit. But after, knowing after a little bit of time of doing that inventory that I was going to have to answer to that inventory, that I started to get, I get literally a physical sensation in the back of my head. That's like a little bit of a chill that's telling me like, hey, you're about to say something you're probably going to regret. And it usually stops me from doing it, but it's, I muscle right through it often. But I pay the price on the spot and have an emotional hangover for sometimes, a day or longer, whatever it is. But without that inventory, I think, I could be sober, but without doing that and being known I need to answer that thing, I'd still be going around, sober, abstinent, but can still just be a jerk, and it keeps me from being so much of a jerk, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah.
Dampens it a little bit.
Yes.
I mean, how free do you want to be, right? And sometimes that is,
yeah.
I want to be so free that sometimes I hold my tongue when it would feel really good to pull out God's flaming sword of truth, which I am sanctioned to wave around,
Right. Yeah.
And it's funny because like, I don't know, my life has changed so drastically since I got married in 2021, and we have had 2 kids and our third on the way. And so we got a really full house. And when you have a bunch of toddlers running around and your wife's pregnant, like, it's always a state of escalation. And so I find myself doing like square breathing. Like, and my wife's like, is everything okay? I'm like, yeah, everything's fine. I'm just making sure everything stays fine.
It's fine.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. Well, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I tell people this all the time. Like, I still like to feel good. I just don't have drugs and alcohol to make that happen. But I feel good doesn't necessarily mean like, it means like, hey, I don't want to like freak out. I want to, I'm trying to stay fine, so I have these tools that were, that most of them were presented to me throughout my life that I either ignored or rejected or misinterpreted or whatever it is. But, I use breathing techniques, among other things, because that's what I got. I can't just pop a pill anymore.
No, it's a beautiful thing too. I was in Prescott when I was there. I got kind of pride and ego in my first couple months of recovery. Once I got out of treatment, I started sponsoring a lot of guys really quickly. There's two things that I do every day. My mentor, he was my second step. He was physical proof that someone as bad as me could get sober and recover through the 12 steps and his life could change. He's an incredible guy, attorney, owns sober livings here in Baton Rouge. I lived in all of his houses at different times. Um, but he said, I do two things. You wake up and you say, okay, and then you try to find somebody to help. Free, nothing for you. Help somebody that nothing can come back and even help. And just saying okay really opens you up to help people. If I wake up and y'all say, look, hey, can y'all hop on this podcast, and share your testimony? Okay. If my wife wakes up and she says, hey, can you bring the kids to school this morning? Okay. Yeah, sure. And then my neighbor calls, a sponsee calls, someone from work calls, needs some help. And I just end up going throughout my day just helping people. And I got really addicted to the feeling of helping people, and I took it too far in early recovery. I really did. I was doing service work every day I possibly could. I was bringing a lot of people to meetings. I was sponsoring a lot of people, and I was sponsoring people that were just getting sponsored so that they could get their phone privileges in treatment, But I wanted to be working with them. And I wanted to take them through the fifth step, and I wanted to hear their inventory. And there was a point where my core group of guys that I got sober with, there was like 15 of us that stayed sober for at least a year. It was pretty incredible. And they were like, hey, we don't like hanging out with you anymore. Like, you're just full of yourself and you think that you're like God's agent here on earth and that you can't do anything wrong. And we think you really need to check yourself. And we're not going to hang out with you until you get humble.
Sounds like good friends.
Yeah, a couple really good friends. And I think about that more and more because I don't think I would have made it without them. And we're kind of talking about getting sober young, talking about working in treatment, talking about living in places where, partying and alcohol is prevalent. And I wouldn't want to go on here and finish this up without me saying hey, without the accountability of my core group, I wouldn't be here. This isn't something that I feel like I did. I went to God and he met me more than halfway. I went to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and it loved me till I could love myself. And I was held accountable by those closest to me. And that's how I've been able to stay sober. It's not just I was blessed, which I was, but it's not just that.
Yeah. I hear you, but you do the work. And as we kind of come up against it here, this has been great, man. And I thank you for everything you've shared. Will you just kind of lay it on us though about some nuts and bolts about what you do work wise and what the programs, where they are, what they are, and and then also how do we find them in you?
Yeah, absolutely. So TNR Recovery Group has a couple programs. Thomas and Roy Isbell started it. Originally with Sabino Recovery in Tucson, Arizona, which is really our flagship program and specifically focuses on trauma and addiction. But it's one of the best trauma programs in the country. You can get 15 a la carte clinical private sessions a week. They have really incredible equine therapy. It backs up to the Sabino Canyon in Tucson, Arizona. And so it's a really holistic program, sleep studies, brain mapping, EMDR, ART, massage, acupuncture, everything under the sun. The cold tub is sweet. And then my responsibility is really kind of what I talked about at the beginning, but outreach, aftercare, and alumni for our Texas programs, which are Cypress Lake Recovery, which is outside of Houston in Woodville, Texas. It's on 52 acres of piney East Texas woods. It overlooks a 20-acre spring-fed lake. The philosophy there is really all paths to recovery. So we offer Wellbriety, Celebrate Recovery, Dharma Recovery, the 12 steps, Smart Recovery. And the idea is by using experiential therapy and making all these pathways to recovery possible, it's a really good landing spot for someone who it's their first treatment experience, or maybe they've been to a lot of treatments before and they just want to have their own personal approach that they choose and they follow. So we really like to promote. They have to choose something, but whatever recovery pathway they choose, we promote it. And then we craft it into their aftercare plan so that they can continue working it. The Wellbriety track is really, really cool. We're really close
Hey,
to
well,
a
real
couple.
quick, what is that?
Yeah,
People-
Wellbriety is the Native American approach to the 12 steps. It's the White Bison Red Road to Wellbriety, and it's basically the 12 steps. For Native Americans, there's a really good book on it. There's really good literature. They have meetings all across the country, and they just have kind of different religious background and spiritual background, and it kind of drums down to Great Spirit, instead of God, but it's the same idea, and it's really the same steps. And it's a really incredible track, and a lot of our Native American clients that come and they enjoy it, and it's a really cool thing. We have a walking trail that has the steps on it with different meditations. You'll have to come and do it, B. I know you like to meditate.
I will.
And then Origins and Hannah's House are gender-specific programs down on South Padre Island, which promote the 12 steps pretty heavily. That is something that's pretty historic about Origins. Clients have the opportunity to work all 12 steps while they're with us. Origins is on the main side of the island, has a beautiful gym. It's like an old bed and breakfast casino style building, which wraps around a big pool and like a courtyard. The patients are going to work the 12 steps there. They'll have opportunities to work on their trauma. And then Hannah's House overlooks the bay. It's only 17 beds. Heavy trauma work for the ladies down there, and still the same approach to the 12 steps. We have a class called Deep Dive where they deep dive into each step each day of the week, and clients can stay there 30, 60, or 90 days. So that's kind of what we do in Texas. And I just try to make it really easy for my outreach team to help get the right people into treatment and try to remove barriers for aftercare planning. My favorite thing to do is get on the phone with a young man who's ready to go back home to Louisiana and tell him, look, you don't have to go back to Louisiana. You can go to Arizona, California, North Carolina, wherever you want in the world. Connect you with a really good program and give you an opportunity to see how big the world really is compared to, no offense, maybe someone's skewed perspective of the world when they get to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Awesome.
And you guys do great work. I mean, we can contest to that. We attest to that.
We only work with places and people and providers we like, know, and trust, and y'all certainly fit that bill.
That's right.
And also wanted to be remiss if I didn't shout out Derek Waltney, who hired me into the field, the aforementioned Derek, and then put us in touch. And so it's been really great to get to know you over the last few years and to see you in real life pretty often, which is great. And just thank you so much for your time today and sharing all this with us. This has been absolutely awesome.
It was my pleasure. Thank you all for having me.
Hey, real quick, last thing though, just how do people find, Sabino and TNR and Origins, all the individual programs, or one place, or whatever you want to say?
Yeah, TNR Recovery Group.com, CypressLakeRecovery.com. You can kind of find all of our programs through any one of those. Origins, Texas Recovery, SabinoRecovery.com. I've got a LinkedIn, which I think will be posted somewhere on here, and you can find all of our links on that. If there is someone who wants some help, if there is someone who just, is struggling in early recovery, I would be happy to be the person that you talk to.
Awesome. They're lucky to have you, Dan. Thank you so much for being here today, man.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Have a good one.
Awesome. If you liked what you heard today or just want to know more, Give us a call on 919-670-8119 or visit us at newwatersrecovery.com. Thank you.